I'm Eric Hayden.
I'm Nick Mason.
I'm Johnny Hollander.
And I'm Andrej.
And this is Neon Static. All right, welcome to episode 11 of Neon Static. Tonight we have a very special episode in store for you. Andrej from the Métropole grid is here. Hey, Andrej.
Hey, how's it going? It's really cool to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you. I'm super excited. But before we get into the episode, we want to thank our patrons, UNM, Chris K, Baxter, Garrett R, and Not Again. Thanks so much for your support. If you want to also support the podcast, you can check us out at patreon.com/neonstatic.
All right, so next up, we're going to jump directly into 24/7 news cycle. And boy, is there a lot of news in this cycle at the moment. I have cards, physical cards with Automata Initiative. So Eric is showing off the cool boxes with the story inserts and the awesome looking bird on the front. But there's a ton of other stuff. There was just Cascadian American Continentals up in Cascadia, which was won by a couple of Boston area folks, correct? The top two.
Well, won by one of them.
Well, yes, generally, yeah, there is a single winner. Yeah, so it's Rongi Doge. Gotcha. Sorry. I wasn't sure if it was the meme or not, so.
It's the meme, yeah, for sure.
Okay, all right. So Rongi Doge, and then Jeff, obviously Ysengrin.
I love how anybody named Jeff who comes into this game at this point is just screwed for recognition.
It's Jeff Ysengrin. It blends together as one word. It's fine. So yeah, they took first and second respectively. I have yet to watch the streams, but it's on my list of things to do when I'm not playing Baldur's Gate 3.
When you go check those out, you'll get to hear Andrej commentating.
There you go.
Yeah, it was great. So it happened. It's an in-person Continentals, which is actually different from the other Continentals going on this month. So it's at a place in Cascadia. And shout outs to the folks on the West Coast that organized it, because from what I've heard, and also it looked like a killer place. And the topic cut, little on the Swiss days, some really good Netrunner on stream. Really, really good stuff.
Nice.
I managed to catch the last 10 minutes of the last game. And my daughters, who have no idea what Netrunner is, were like glued to my screen. I mean, A, because it's a screen, and B, because they could see my interest, sitting there watching, going, oh no, Jeff, oh no, this is going to be it. It's not it. Holy shit. There's some big moments. So it's great games to watch.
Yeah, if you're also a startup person, they did the startup Continentals. They did a side tournament that's also up there. There's no commentary for it yet. Maybe there will be later. But if you want to watch like high level startup stuff there, you can also tune into the end of the stream.
Nice. So what else is coming up? We got Your Africans, the other Continental, coming up this weekend. The weekend of the, 17th, 18th, something around there. I don't do math.
The 19th, yeah.
19th, yeah. Somewhere around the 17th or 18th. Now, that one is on Jinteki tournament, correct?
Your Africa's is online, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone can join also. It's you don't have to live in any certain zone to get in there.
Right. Yeah, just like you could, fly from Boston to Cascadia to win Cascadia. So, and then the weekend after that, there is another Nationals tournament. Andrej, why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm running Canadian Nationals. This is the second Canadian Nationals. Canada is big enough to have two, which is pretty all right. And so that's in Montreal on the 26th and the 27th at a nice place called the Silver Goblin. I'm super stoked. I know some folks from your area, your part of the woods is coming up. We have people coming in from Ontario, and it's the first major Netrunner event to ever happen in Quebec, because we've always just had to drive down to Toronto, because that's how they did it. They always just put it in Toronto. And then finally they're like, okay, you can do it now. It's going to be really fun. I'm super excited.
That's awesome.
You organized it, right?
Yeah, no, I applied for it. I'm doing the judging and TOing. I got some help. My partner is doing a lot of the sort of data entry stuff. She's an absolute hero. And we have other people around the community that are helping out. But yeah, this is my thing that I've been working on for a while now.
Nice.
Very cool. Power to you.
Thanks.
Just trying to imagine our partners participating in Netrunner tournaments in any capacity.
Yeah.
That comes in the form of being allowed to do shit like this for me. So her participating is going, I will watch those children go talk about your nerdy crap. I guess the last piece of news is that Worlds is officially sold out. That's a huge accomplishment for this not quite so dead card game.
Yeah.
230 tickets got sold out of the 260 seats that they have available to play there.
That's kind of crazy.
How many rounds is that?
Don't do the math.
It's long. It's like 8 rounds of Swiss, I think. I think they
double-sided.
Yeah, I think it's double-sided. I'm pretty sure it's double-sided.
Wow.
I think they said that this is the biggest MSG Worlds ever, and actually is maybe the second biggest Netrunner Worlds of all time. I think that's what the number they said, but like, it's incredible.
That would not surprise me. This is, I believe, bigger than the L5R Worlds that I went to, which was like huge. But even then, they had enough seats to where they were just giving away entry into the main event on the second day. So
I can't even comprehend this. I mean, we just went to East Coast Nationals, which was 59 people, I believe.
Yeah.
And that was humongous for us.
Yeah.
And 260 people if they have all those seats. And I don't doubt that all of those tickets will go.
They will.
So that is like not even comprehensible for me. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It sounds like a really good time. It's in Barcelona, I believe. Not something, unfortunately, that any of us are going to. I assume, Andrej, you're going to it. You're going to do commentary, right?
Yeah, I'll be there. I plan to do some commentary. I've got an acceptance on that. We have to, obviously, we don't know the details yet, this organization, but I definitely will be there for all of it, which is absolutely exciting.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for bringing it to us.
Take a lot of stamina.
Us homebodies.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Bring
It's
snacks.
a lot of stamina for sure.
Yeah, no, it's a totally wild weekend, but it's like so energizing. You go in there, you think it's going to be exhausting. At the end of the day, maybe a bit, but like you're just excited to get into more Netrunner immediately right when it's over.
Yep. Yeah. Just hypes you up to see like all the like absolute top level play and everything too. So
Yeah.
that's always fun.
We also did want to mention that we mispronounced some names on the last episode that we had. We introduced the names of the hosts of Querying the Message, and we said Ellie. It's Eli.
Yeah. I don't know where I got Ellie.
And Monda instead of, I think maybe we said Mond. So apologies.
Yeah, I was reading it
go
in
check
French.
that show out. Sorry, Nick.
I said I was reading it in French. Le Monde.
Perfect.
There you go.
That's the world.
That's
right?
my excuse.
That's
yes.
the world.
That's it. The
Oh,
whole
shit.
shebang.
Andre, do you speak French?
Seulement un peu. A bit. I can get by, but I'm not fluent.
That's the
That's
same
it.
phrase I know.
Exactly.
That's the language of many vowels. Okay. Next up, we've got accelerated beta test.
All right. This is where we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately. Andre, why don't you kick it off?
What I've been playing, so new set's out. I've been unfortunately playing a whole bunch of Mercury, trying to get that to work. It's been really frustrating. I don't want to get into it. Thank you.
Is it because I have this built for tomorrow night, so I need to know before I go in.
Okay.
Is the Spark Fem deck anything?
I haven't tried that. I am actually a bit more confident about that. In short, my issue with Mercury is as soon as you start interacting and they start resing their ice, you realize your ability stops being relevant. So like Femme Fatale is a nice way to deal with that.
Okay. All right. Well, that's my plan. No programs.
Yeah, let me know how it goes.
Just Femme
Best of luck out
Fatale.
there.
I'd like to hear more about the viability of Mercury as an ID, because when we saw that card, we were all really excited about it.
Yeah. No, it's a very cool ability when it fires. I think the problem is how much of the game it's going to fire if you keep running.
Yeah.
Nick, you had built the kind of sit back, patient, importing 3 liberated accounts.
Yep.
Mercury. How, did you get to play that last Wednesday? Did that work out?
I did. The econ part of it worked great. I don't know that Mercury. Yeah, the parts that I imported from Anarch really just absolute top notch. The rest of the deck was fine, but would have been better with anything else around that same econ shell. So you know,
is there not enough stuff that bypasses?
it's the way that it felt to me, and I've got fewer games than Andre on it, but it felt like when the the ability fires, you're not necessarily getting value. You're getting maybe value. You're getting some accesses, but it could be nothing. And the Corp, on the other hand, is getting to res ice, and then you have to go into that forever. And yeah, it just gets harder and harder to trigger the longer the game goes on. And that's when the odds of you getting more agendas start to go up. So it that kind of fought the ability, I felt like.
Yeah, they're like, the Mercury ability is like strangely incompatible with most of the criminal econ engine, which is all about making successful runs. Because as soon as you start, hammering centrals, the ice is res, and then your ability doesn't work because only Banner really works, the breaker that doesn't break subroutines.
Right.
Maybe you fem something, give inside job. And then you also realize like your card draw is pretty bad because you're playing criminals. So you have to import a lot of things, and there's just a lot of problems you have to fix. So card slots are hard. It's hard to put the what's it called? The capybaras you wanted there. It's hard to slot the D-res stuff that you probably need because that ice is going to get resed. So I feel like I'd be really excited for Mercury once we see the second half of the set, which I have no doubt is going to have like a cool way to deal with code gates and maybe a bit more aggressive payoff, stuff like that. So it's tricky right now. And I think criminal generally is a bit tricky right now. Maybe I'm a bit pessimistic, but that's at least where I started with the Dominant Initiative. But I've been playing a lot of Ari, and that's been kind of keeping my hopes up because I don't know if y'all tried Ari so far. Arsana, absolutely incredible, just absurd nonsense all the time. It is so powerful.
Yeah, and like super fun turns where you're just, I'm gonna throw down this thing, and then I'm gonna slap vandal you, and I'm gonna pass it with Cubon, and it's making me money, and this is amazing. So cool to watch.
Pretty good.
So many moving parts.
Yeah.
So Jeff, Yasinger and Jeff, not the other Jeffs.
Not everybody else.
He took Arizona to second place at Cascadia, and he published his list for tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's our weekly meetup. But Andrej had a surprise stream today, and he played like 3 or 4 games of Arizona with a slightly different list, but a really cool one with Aeneas Informant that I had seen around. And yeah, it just got me really excited to play some of that deck. It looks like the thing that I want to be on for like a few months. So it's exciting. But hear me out. On Mercury.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm going to keep a straight face. I promise. Kurapira, Banner, and Egret, and everything's a barrier. No, I'm sorry. I can't.
Okay. I didn't know how far you were going to take that.
No. I do. I want Mercury to be good. I want it to be like someone to come up with the magic formula, and maybe it's more cards. And patience is a virtue, right? So
yeah. I'm not going to say that if I can't figure out how to make Mercury work, no one can, because I think you probably can. It's probably going to be an interesting build if it works at all. So still, don't let me discourage you with that. I think it's going to be really cool. I think I'll play 419 for a bit. Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. Andrej, unless you have other decks that you want to shout out that you've been playing or other things besides Nightrunner 2.
I think you're going to mention the snake draft thing. That's a cool thing that's going on right now. I just recently joined into the local area, the American local area Discords, and there's a snake draft going on. I'll let you explain it. I've built my decks. I haven't played a game yet, and I'm actually kind of waiting to play my first game because apparently you can change your deck after playing your first game. So I need to get one game out of the way so I can just cut all the killers out of my deck and not have to worry about that problem. I'm gaming the system.
You should play a game before everybody plays their first game and makes their deck better so that you have a doughy opponent to play against. Also, it's pronounced Murica.
Wow.
So Andrej and I are both a part of the same snake draft, and this came out of the NYC meta. Analyzed Chris. I actually hopped into the Discord and asked him, like, where'd you guys start this from? And apparently they had started doing snake drafts, and then Magic folks grabbed their spreadsheet and took it and like beautified it, and then Analyzed Chris took it back and Netrunner-ified it. So we were using that. I will have a link in the show notes to a copy of the spreadsheet that we've been using, which is beautiful, very functional and really neat. And the idea is that we have 8 players and 16 rounds, so I guess change to your taste how many rounds you have. We're doing this in the standard format, but I guess it's adaptable to other formats. And you go a snake draft if you're familiar from other games. So if Andrej's first, he would pick one card, and then I would go next and pick a card. We'd go all the way down the line, and by picking a card, you're reserving 3 copies, or a full play set, I guess, in the case of things like Matryoshka. A full play set, those are for you alone. You can deck build with those, you don't have to. And then it'll snake back to the person at the very end, which in our case was Andrej. Yeah. You get to pick 2 things in a row, and then it comes back. And then at the end of 16 draft rounds, 16 picks each, you build 2 decks, and then play games with them. And I got to say, the drafting was a freaking blast.
It was so fun.
Really liked the drafting because it was like, and Nick, honestly, you got to try it. You would love the drafting. You might hate the games.
Yeah, that I feel like is my fear, is that like all the fun is in the part where I am specifically hate drafting against everybody else. And then I look at the pile of cards that I have constructed and go, I got to play how many games with this?
Yeah, a fair few. I have some thoughts on, we had like one hate drafter.
Oh, yeah, we
did. one dedicated hate drafter in ours.
Absolutely messed everything up. It's really fun to watch.
I drafted Arizona first pick on the runner side, which maybe had been a mistake. And then Cubans got taken away from me, and I was very sad about that. And so I got a little vindictive and hate drafted backwards near the end. Anyway, it's a really good time. And everybody was like super, super honed in to our Discord channel for like 3 or 4 days. And I've worked out some kinks to the deck. I think it'll be better now. I realized that no one chose Aeneas Informant, so that's going in for some money in my deck. Anyway, that's been a lot of fun, and I have been mostly net decking the fun, new, exciting decks out of Cascadia and APAC for in-person play, and I'm excited about that. Johnny, what about you?
Yeah, I haven't been playing that runner still. Although neither has Nick, so I mean, there's that.
But I've been thinking and reading about it and building decks and stuff. Okay, yeah. I'm engaged.
It is fine to take some time off.
Yeah, the summer has been dedicated to mostly outdoor stuff. I've been playing a lot of disc golf.
Yeah,
and I've been playing a little bit of Diablo and Stellaris once a week with Nick.
Yeah, game's good. Stellaris, and I have been playing pretty much exclusively Baldur's Gate 3.
Damn it.
It's a good game, guys. It's very good.
You have been playing some Netrunner despite you saying not. We did have some in-person meetup.
That's
stuff.
true. Yeah, that is where I played Mercury and realized that the only good cards were Anarch cards. Oops.
You had a corp. Didn't you have a corp that you had built that you...
It was terrible. Yeah, that was the Jinteki deck that was trying to kill you with Neurospike.
Your PE Neurospike, yeah.
Yeah, it was not very good. Turns out it's just better to either score things or kill people, not do a weird 4-click combo where you end up doing both.
What's the... there was a Jinteki ID that did the Neurospike thing pretty well. There was an APAC deck that did...
Yeah, there was.
Oh God,
there was the one that likes the face down cards in archives, gives you money.
Yes, that one.
You do that.
Oh yeah, there's a punitive list.
Yes,
APAC.
that was it. It was a punitive list, and I'm playing a kind of variation on that tomorrow, which will be SSO punitive. So CityWorks and fast advance agendas and stuff like that. Tree lines.
Nice. Punishing for stealing your stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, you can either steal my stuff and die, or I can score it and then you die.
It's a choice.
Exactly.
How would you like to die? Okay.
Yeah.
With that, I think let's move on to spec work. In spec work, we talk about cool rules interactions that we have noticed since the last time we recorded, and we have 2 for you tonight. One was from a local Discord. I saw this conversation some months ago. I don't know how viable it is, but it's pretty devastating if you pull it off. Reconstruction Contract, though, is a card that maybe some of our listeners aren't familiar with, so we're going to read the pieces to this combo. Both of them revolve around Ob, by the way. Ob turns out is a great combo construction ID.
And a rules question creator.
Rules question generator.
How does this work?
So Reconstruction Contract is an asset that says whenever the runner suffers any amount of meat damage, you may place 1 advancement token on Reconstruction Contract. And then you can trash Reconstruction Contract at instant speed to move any number of advancement tokens from Reconstruction Contract to a card that can be advanced. So the combo is that, the trash ability, and Clearinghouse out of Ob. So Clearinghouse is a 0 cost to res asset that says you can advance this asset. When your turn begins, you may trash this asset to do 1 meat damage for each hosted advancement counter. So the combo is that you can have a Reconstruction Contract on the board at the start of your turn with a bunch of advancement counters on it, trash it, and then in between the trashing when the counters are gone, go use Ob to fetch a clearinghouse, which is a 0-cost asset. Critically, Ob can only fetch things that are exactly 1 credit less than whatever is being trashed. So you can trash the 1-cost reconstruction contract to go fetch the 0-cost clearinghouse. And then before reconstruction contract is finished being trashed, transfer the advancement tokens over to the clearinghouse. Then the start of your turn occurs, and then you can do 1 meat damage per reconstruction contract.
And blow them up. Now
and blow them up. Out of nowhere.
The big important thing in here is, and this is something that I'm finding with a lot of these rules interactions, when you fire the reconstruction contract, it needs to have a valid target. So if you have no cards on the board that can be advanced, this combo doesn't work.
And do you know how you prove that?
You probably flip over a piece of ice after you've killed them with clearinghouse.
You have to call a judge over.
Really?
You have to call a judge over and show them your face down ice is not advanceable or is advanceable. Because you're not allowed to just show your ice.
You could just it's a card that can be advanced. It could be like a face up. You're just moving it to your ice wall. My ice wall is going to be real strong. Don't worry. Nope. Psych.
Just having something is fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you all noticed how spicy this interaction gets. So there's a bunch of awkward stuff. This sort of combo I've seen a while ago. I think Encoder posted a list that's just called Heartbreak when Op came out a long time ago. So the issue is, this is really important. You cannot advance reconstruction contract.
Right.
So getting advancements on it is really difficult. So what you have to do is you have to play cards like Seamless Launch or La Costa, and then you can just put advancement counters on it. Now you're thinking why would they let you do that? Why wouldn't they just run the thing? And the combo here, by the exact same rules, is if they ever run your reconstruction contract while it has, say, 3 to 4 counters on it, after they've committed to access, you say, give me 1 second. You res the reconstruction contract, you trash it, you go get an Urtica cipher.
Yep.
And then they die.
That's like the Jemison lists that are out there. Yeah.
Oh, that's so delicious.
I love the joy on Nick's face right now.
That's so good. You finally get to kill someone with Urtica. It never happens, except to me that one time in a startup tournament.
This sort of thing too, for your CityWorks deck, you can at instant speed when they choose to access the CityWorks on the table, you just res the reconstruction, move the advancements to the CityWorks. There's a bunch of weird lines with this thing that are really fun.
Oh, I like that.
The gears are turning.
Yeah. Wait, you can do that with Slash and Burn Agriculture too, right? That can advance
Cost
stuff.
a click though.
Yeah, it's not instant speed.
Okay.
But Slash and Burn can only be on cards that can be advanced. I'm pretty sure.
Oh, so it can't do reconstruction contract.
Exactly. This card specifically cannot be advanced, which is very, very uncomfortable. There's very few cards that interact with it.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it doesn't say this card can be advanced, but they chose to use advancement tokens instead of power counters like some other cards do.
Right.
And you wouldn't be able to game the system this way.
There was a weird meta when this deck was something to worry about, that you also wanted to go out of your way to not install any other assets, because the only way to beat this combo was to pinhole threading, and then they didn't know which card you're going to access. And so if you popped your combo, you would access their other asset, and so you never had to touch the Urtica. There was some weird bend over backwards to make sure you don't die to this thing, because technically you have to deal with it, otherwise you're going to die to clearinghouse. But if you deal with it, you're going to die to Urtica, and it's really ugly, but it can still work. It does still work in the format, in standard at least, right?
Wait, hang on. If I know where the reconstruction contract is.
Which physical card?
Right. But doesn't that not kill me with Pinhole? Because I say I'm going to access.
Well, they have to pop it first.
Because Pinhole is access 1 card in a server.
Yeah. And you have to.
Oh, I see. Yes. Okay. I see.
Pinhole is not optional, right?
Yep. Yeah. So once you get to success, then you pop it, replace it with the Urtica, and they have to do something, and it's death.
So just make sure you don't have any other upgrades or assets out there, because then they'll just pinhole the other one.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm digging it.
And the other one was an interaction that came up as I was watching Andrej's stream. So Andrej, do you want to tell us about this Ob and Tucana thing?
Yeah. So we're back to Op. Obviously, Op has all the fun interactions. So there's a 3-2 agenda called Aziev Protocol. You're probably familiar with this. And it says there's an additional cost for you to score this thing. You have to trash one of your installed cards. It doesn't have to be rezzed, but very importantly, if you're playing op, once a turn, when you trash a res card using an ability or an effect, you can go get something from your deck. And then once you score out Aziev and you do 2 meat damage, that's not actually that important. But the idea is, if you have an Aziev on the table and you do advance score, before it actually scores out, you have to pay the additional cost. So say that you have a 3-cost res somewhere on the table, you can trash it. And then using op, you can go get a 2-coster from your deck, install it and res it for free. And that happens before you actually score the Aziev because you're currently paying the additional cost. So one of the new very, very powerful cards in the new set is Tucana, which is this unique upgrade that says whenever you score an agenda from the server that Tucana is, you can search your deck and install a piece of ice that costs, you save 3 credits and you install and res it for 3 credits cheaper. So the idea is that even without any ice on the table, you can, or any ice in the server specifically, I guess, you can do score at one of these. You can fast advance them if you have like a slash and burn, and then trash the 3-coster, get the Tucana, then technically you score the Aziev and you can go get some ice at instant speed. It's a really weird thing to see happen.
I love these little discoveries. I think watching you doing this, JNet showed you that you could do it, and you're like, oh,
wait a second,
Tucana works. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, the timing on that one's so weird. There's like a bunch of rules interactions about Aziev has an additional cost. Then where do the counters go? Because also, if you want to play with the Reconstruction Contract, Aziev works with it. You can score an Aziev, trash a 2-coster to get the Reconstruction Contract on the table, and then the meat damage happens, and then the counters will go on the Reconstruction Contract, so you can start that weird combo that you want to build with your clearinghouse.
This is one big combo deck we've been talking about for the last 5 minutes.
It all works together.
I love it. Just put them all in a pile and go.
Yeah, you got to get some more ob games under your belt, Nick, because I think there's some gold there for you.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, we have a really interesting main segment that we're going to go into after a brief word from our sponsors. Guys, I'm so excited about the big tournament this weekend. I've been testing my decks, and I think I'm all set.
Oh man, me too. So pumped.
I wish I was as excited as you were, but honestly, tournaments present a real problem for me. I can never find anything to eat that keeps me full and energized, and finding food during short breaks at events always stresses me out.
Hi, Nick. Oh man, do I have just a thing for you.
Andrej, from the Métropole grid, what are you doing here?
I'm never not here. I've been going to tournaments for years, and I used to have the same problem you did. I want restaurant quality food, but I want to enjoy them from the comfort of my own game store. So I've started cooking my tournament meals at home using the awesome meal kits from Pālanā Foods, a Kentucky division.
I've heard of them, but doesn't cooking take a lot of time?
Well, Eric, that's one of the major conveniences of Pālanā Food meal kits. Unlike most meal kit services, these kits all come ready to eat out of the box.
Oh, you don't cook the meal kit?
Nope. Kentucky's patented efficient food cube methodologies keep extremely well in the mail, so they're able to prepare the food before it even leaves the agroplex.
Did he say food cubes?
What are the food cubes made out of?
They're definitely made out of something.
Wait, so you don't know what you're eating?
Pālanā food cubes are made of whatever composite parts were the most affordable on the day of manufacturing. The value. Each week you get a pick from 50 different leaf-flavored food cubes. You got choices like creamy dill food cube, home-style cube loaf, barbecue grilled food cube, and so many other cube-shaped options.
All right, this all sounds great, but isn't it annoying to eat the cube with a fork and knife at the tournament?
I'm glad you asked, Johnny. Food cubes don't require utensils. You just grab it and eat it, like this.
For the love of God, what is that?
It's twitching. Oh, God.
That's some good cube. And if you want to try Pālanā Food meal kits for yourself, just go to foodcube.com and use the code TECHNICALLYFOOD for up to 16 free cubes.
Oh no, it's so much worse than I thought. What was the code?
That's foodcube.com and code TECHNICALLYFOOD.
Guys, I'm hungry.
So with that fantastic sponsorship out of the way, let's go into the depths. So today, we're going to talk about taking the jump from startup into standard, into the deep end, one could say, a deep dive into the depths. Is any of this working?
Yeah, it's great.
Good.
It's all working.
Love it.
Keep going.
Excellent. This is something that we have all done relatively recently. Well, not Andrej, but go from startup focused to standard focused, and it's a pretty big change, but it probably sounds more intimidating in the abstract than it is like once you break it all down. So why don't we break it all down?
Yeah, I guess one thing before we start, I want to establish a little bit of credentials. You may have been pointed to this podcast by someone else who's trying to get you into standard, and you might not know who we are. So Nick and Johnny and I are very recent converts from the startup format to the standard format. So we are, I believe, our own target audience. We've crossed this threshold. We've been here for just a little while, and now we want to share our recent experience. So if you are a startup player who's interested but not so sure, hopefully you hear what we have to say and take it with more than a grain of salt. What's the opposite of a grain of salt? More or less?
Less. No salt whatsoever.
No salt. Don't take salt with it.
Take this as flavorless as possible.
And believe us, because we are you in the past.
Okay.
I
sure.
think that all makes sense.
Somehow we got into time traveling in the middle there, and
or you are us in the future. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
okay.
So the card pools overlap a lot between the two. Startup has System Gateway and System Update. Both of those are the same between both and have a lot of the kind of core cards, hedge funds, and such. And then right now, as we record this on August 15th, Startup has the Borealis cycle, which is 135 cards, Midnight Sun and Parhelion, the two sets. And then the first half of the Liberation cycle, which is the recently released Automata Initiative, 65 cards. So right now, Startup is at the biggest it will be, because when the second half of the Liberation cycle comes out, all of the Borealis cycle will cycle out. Overall, it's a pretty small, manageable card pool, even right now where it is as big as it's ever going to be. There is no ban list, so anything you have, you can throw into a deck. A total of 352 cards. I'm trusting whoever did the math on this.
It was me.
Okay.
Note on the ban list, though, it does sound like that might change in the future. We are recording this in August of 2023. As of right now, there is no ban list, but there was a recent article discussing startup balance team recruitment effectively. They kind of want some feedback, and it sounds like they're considering maybe putting some sort of balancing into that format.
I think that's a good call, because I actually think that while it's kind of billed as a benefit to startup, it's simpler. There's no ban list. It actually can ruin the meta if they refuse to ban anything, no matter how broken something may be.
How much it's in every deck, boat. It's boat. It's the boat.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the big reasons that we moved away from startup, besides just curiosity and sort of, I feel like the natural evolution of you're playing this game, you've seen some stuff in this cycle, and you start to notice these other cards and want to find out what they're all about. I think that's a good thing in the future, but for now, I would list the ban list and the most active balancing of the game, a pro of standard versus startup.
Yep. So what do you add going into standard in terms of like the card sets? So there is Red Sand Cycle, Katara Cycle, and those are both FFG's cycles, Rain and Reverie, the Ashes Cycle, which was the first full Null Signal, and then there are 6 legal cards from the Magnum Opus reprint. What 6 cards are those? Are those the like Sunny, like the individual Sunny and Atom cards that are still legal?
No, it's a really weird set of cards. So Magnum Opus was a set of cards that was released alongside the final World Championship, and I think it was 2018 that FFG put on. Because FFG back in the day, and Null Signal largely still does this, is if you won a major premier event, you were allowed to work with them, and they would help design a card that would say at the bottom, designed by, World Championship, Dan D'Argenio, whatever, something like that. And so there was like 5 or 6 of these cards that were still basically done, but were slated to release in products that once FFG lost the license would not exist anymore. So they're like, we already have the art. We've already designed these. They just released them, and people at Worlds in 2018 could get them. So it was a very powerful and very interesting product. It has some very notable cards. Out of the 6 cards, I think like half of them are banned. So like it's only 3 cards functionally in standard. But Null Signal realized that, only so many people were able to be in Minnesota that one October, whenever it was. So they released them themselves, and they have their own art, their own framing and stuff like that. But it is 6 cards, of which I think either 2 or 3 of them banned.
Yeah, so it's 6 cards then, and 2 of them are banned. Crowdfunding and Slot Machine are both banned.
So that's about doubling the card pool, all told.
Yeah.
And then 39 cards are on the banned list, which I got to be honest, that sounds intimidating, but I don't know most of what's on the banned list because I have Netrunner DB and it just doesn't show me things that are on the banned list. So I don't need to learn them.
Even if you're building with cards, you take the banned cards out of your pool and you don't think about them. You put them away in a box somewhere. You don't need to know what they are once you've removed them.
But I'm pretty sure I haven't done that. I think they're in with all my other cards. I've taken out all the rotated stuff, but none of the actual banned cards. So,
but you could do it.
So that's one of the things that people might be intimidated about is, I need to worry about this ban list that's always changing and cards might be legal that I want to build with. And if you are a true crack open the box, put all my cards out on the table and spread the whole collection out and build the deck from that, then that could potentially be a problem for you. It would behoove you to do what Johnny's talking about and just find out what banned cards exist and remove them from your collection so that doesn't happen. But practically, I feel like most players use a tool like Netrunner DB or explicitly Netrunner DB, the fantastic deck building tool that we have that will manage this stuff for you. You don't need to worry about it. Yeah, otherwise, I feel like this concern is slightly overblown.
It's not been an issue for me to have to juggle it in my head like, oh no, actually that card that I intended to put in here is banned because, again, coming from startup, you just don't learn them in the first place. And then people tell you about them and you go, that was legal? They printed that?
So that's like the only thing that there's a bit of concern about. So I play way more standard than startup. I'm a huge advocate of standard. It's a phenomenal format. We've also just had a new set and a new rotation. So it's also a very fresh format, which is, I think, a big part of why this episode is going out right now, because this is actually one of the most naturally, a very, very easy way to consider, an easy time to consider translating into standard. That being said, when it comes to the ban list, 39 cards seems like a big number. There's a lot of focus here on numbers, and I think we'll talk about how the numbers might be a bit misleading. But specifically, you do have to watch out if you're going from startup to standard. If you hear 39 cards and you think the banned cards are only like some old FFG cards, no, there's actually a fair few no signal game cards that are banned. So for instance, there's a lot of joking about endurance, but endurance currently is banned in standard. So there are actually a fair few startup lists that you cannot just bring to standard. It's not just the card pool gets bigger, but technically because of the ban list, some startup decks are actually illegal and technically would be stronger or like stronger than their standard counterparts because, again, there's no ban list currently in startup. Well, that looks like it might change in the future.
Right.
Right. So what Andrej was saying about the numbers not being so important, that's one of the big things that we're going to focus on as we move forward here. There's 749 cards in standard and only 352 in startup. But even though the card pool technically, roughly doubles, it is in practical terms nowhere near that many cards that you need to learn.
Right.
It's not. In effect, there are only a few cards from each cycle that actually matter and that you will see out in the wild on a regular basis, or even some of these cards you will almost never see. Andrej, I think you have a relevant story to tell here about this.
Yeah, we were running this on stream just today, and we're looking at the Red Sand cycle, which is a very weird cycle from FFG time. It is the oldest cycle that is still legal in standard, and it contains 120 cards. But if you were to ask me if I could, what cards do I think are, and I think you explained it really nicely, like cards you expect to see at tables. So when you go to an event, again, always ask your opponent to read your cards if you're not familiar, but like cards that I think you ought to know or that see any sort of consistent play, there's 19 cards. So
like he counted.
Yeah.
He went through and counted on the stream.
So that's a really big difference that has to be understood between the null signal games design and some of the FFG era designs. And it changes from cycle to cycle, but null signal games has what I would say a much better hit percentage in which they're more actively putting out cards that are more interesting, that will see consistent play. I still think null signal makes cards that are overpowered and underpowered, and those are both interesting in their own ways. But there's just a lot of cards that, and mind you, these are old cards. So we've gone this long without anyone really, breaking some interesting brew with them. That's just kind of just take up binder slots, unfortunately. And that's just maybe what running a company for profit is. That's just super pessimistic. I don't exactly believe it, but it's an entirely different design process. So when you look at the Red Sand cycles and think, I have to learn 120 new cards, that's intimidating. It's less than 20. It is way less of a bigger card pool jump than any of these numbers kind of make it look like it is.
I'd like to get a list of all the cards from each of the cycles that are relevant, especially if I didn't already own them and I was looking to get into startup or to standard rather, to know if I just wanted to print my own proxies, which cards do I need to print?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing I think needs to be said here for those who are listening that have their nice No Signal Games cards. We're talking about a format that consists of, at this point, it's not even half, but a large percentage of cards that haven't been in print for now, 5 years. And of course, it goes without saying, I hope, that at all level of tournament play, proxies are legal. So while it might be difficult to go hunt down, the real deal, the real Reign and Reverie still in shrink wrap, which is an astoundingly low print run, unfortunately, because they lost the license right about that same time. You can just go get them printed out yourself. Proxies work at all levels of tournaments. They don't even have to be in color. And we have a bunch of other nice stuff to shout out, right? Like, I'm not sure exactly what Mildside does. I know Mildside used to be distributing. That's a person in...
Yep.
Okay.
So Mildside is a person who, at some point in the past, bought basically a room full of Netrunner cards. He went and bulk ordered full cycles and has a post up on Reddit, has a post on the GLC Discord that you can find him in. And you just find his username. If you just search for Mildside, MYLD, he will sell you cycles of cards, of proxies of FFG cards. I really, really hope that no one is going out to buy original FFG cards. The aftermarket prices are insane. It is not worth it, in my opinion. Proxies are great. On the topic of cost, if you were to go out and buy cards via the stuff that's legally available from NSG, which are generally like $45 a pack, and just buy the currently legal startup stuff, it would cost you $225. And if you were to go and buy every card that you then were missing via Mildside, and also the stuff that is rotated out of the NSG stuff, you would spend an additional $250, totaling $475. So it's not a cost to be shrugged at, but you don't need to spend any of that money. If you have the startup cards, great. If you want to substitute in proxies, it is a very small amount of cards that you actually need to print. Your startup decks, if you modify them, it's not like 90% of the decks are going to be cards that you need to proxy. It's more like 10%.
I got real good numbers about this. I think we'll talk about this in a while, but I looked at the Continentals decks from this weekend and said, if you were a startup player, how many of the cards in these decks, if you watched on stream or you want to build them, how many of these would be new cards? And these are top tier competitive standard decks. And in some decks, there's 2 cards you don't know. 2 cards you'd have to proxy. Full play sets, but that's how approachable. That's actually a very also big misunderstanding. When you look at these numbers and think, oh, wow, standard has twice the card pool as startup. When you look at competitive top tier play, at organized casual play, the majority of decks are about 80 to 90% startup decks, because No Signal Games has been putting out consistent bangers. Whether you want to call it power creep, I think the game is different right now, but just keep that in mind. Is if you know, specifically also if you know Ashes, I think if you know the Ashes cycle, if you've been playing startup for maybe a year now, you know just about everything. There's 3-4 cards you have to know in the whole the standard card pool outside of that. It's really surprising.
Before we move off of the subject of proxies, I do want to mention Proxy Nexus. There's a website which I will put a link to in the show notes called Proxy Nexus. If you're thinking about, how do you actually make proxies? It sounds annoying to find the images and all that stuff. There's a website. You type the name of the card in. It automatically formats it, puts it in the right area and size for a card, and tells you how to print it. You just cut it out. Put an old rotated card or a playing card, any kind of playing card, in a sleeve behind it, and you're good.
On top of that, huge shout out too for Project Red Sands, Project Katara. I think there's one of these for Reign and Reverie too, where a community has got together to print their own versions of art for all of these FFG sets that are now part of standard. So you can go to make playing cards and just buy them right there. It'll be more expensive, as much as buying stuff on Make Playing Cards would be to buy 120 times 3 cards. But if you want a nice, fully professionally printed thing, which again, you can do proxies, that exists. And shout out to all the community folks who came together to donate their art to make this as approachable as possible. It's people are bending over backwards to help anyone get into standard, because that's just kind of how Netrunner is. And because the jump, we understand, from starter to standard can be a bit daunting, and everyone just wants you to get your feet in, because there's a huge amount of confidence that once you got your toes in, you're going to want to go in.
So do we all prefer standard over startup? I know I do.
Yeah,
I do.
So
yeah,
I'd love to hear some reasons why we prefer it.
The big one for me is that, and I've said this I think a couple times, the startup card pool, at least as we have primarily played it, feels like there's about 2/3 of any given deck in that card pool. So you say, all right, I'm going to build a Lou trash heavy Anarch deck. And you start throwing cards in, and you get to, 30, 35 cards. And you're like, all right, I've kind of run out of things that like fit the theme that, synergize pretty well. I guess I'm just throwing in good, kind of like the least bad stuff that's left in the card pool, which is not a great feeling when you're deck building to just be like looking at cards and going, I guess, and putting in 3 copies.
It's like a snake draft.
Yeah. But like moving into standard where because you have this larger card pool to draw on, you can fill out the rest of that with cards that you actually want. And in fact, I now often, every time, find myself with the opposite problem where I start building a deck and I'm like, all right, I'll just throw in everything that looks cool, that fits with my game plan and blah, blah, blah. And I'm at 75 cards. And now I have to cut because I'm not playing Big Hoshiko. And like, it's difficult to get down to 45 or 49 rather than difficult to get up to it. And that is, to me, way more fun than, I guess I'll play this.
Slots are hard.
Yeah, there's this weird thing. Again, I'm not part of NSG, so I don't speak on their behalf, of course. But you might notice if you saw one of the last sets, right? Like a card regulatory capture came out. It's a 6/2 Wayland agenda that decreases in difficulty based off of bad publicity. And then if you look at the startup card pool where this card is legal, you realize you don't really have options to make this card do anything. And that's because new cards are designed and balanced with standard in mind. Unfortunately for startup players, like there's definitely some, interest to make sure startup is nice and fair, but a lot of these cards exist within this entire conversation of this card pool, which they were balanced alongside the modern rotation, the modern ban list. And so there's a lot of this stuff that it's missing out. Regulatory capture in standard is a really swell card.
It almost makes startup almost disingenuous. I don't mean to call out null signal games, but the way that's phrased, it makes it sound like startup isn't really a format that's viable to play, at least not for very long.
Startup's success, from my understanding, again, I don't speak on behalf of NSG, want to make that very clear, was kind of an accident, right? Like it was meant to be a thing that came forward to be like, hey, if you want to get into the game, this is like a nice thing that you can play that has just the NSG cards. You can get them online right now. And I think NSG might have been surprised with how successful startup was as a format, how appealing it was. Because I think inherently, you look at the ban list that only now is, looking at SBL for startup. They were hoping it was just a stepping stone, but we find a lot of players who want to like hang out in the startup zone, and there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. But yeah, maybe disingenuous. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but it is totally true that a lot of the decisions classically came with standard in mind.
Well, and I think what you'll find too is that, reg capture is kind of a binder card in startup. There's not enough bad publicity stuff to make it really work, but there are other cards that become binder fodder when you move into standard out of startup. Cards that are like, okay, they're fine when you're in this more limited card pool. They give you enough power for what they do, but then when you move into sort of the wider world, they aren't useful anymore because either there's better replacements or there's more efficient things, or just the type of game plan they're pushing isn't all that useful to push. So like that kind of stuff, the cards that are useful and good change depending on the format, which kind of makes sense. They're all contextual.
I think in the case of standard, it's more that once the cards are released, they have a lot more people theory crafting, and people are figuring out that the cards aren't as powerful as they thought. I mean, not every card in a 135 card set is going to be used.
Sure.
I mean, that's never going to happen.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's the same thing in startup or standard. If it's reg capture in startup, or I can't think of a really good example of like one that's like a killer in startup that doesn't get played in standard.
I think maybe this might be wrong, but like economy options like Wildcat Strike might see more play in startup than standard, because in standard you have more options that might work more elegantly with the rest of your deck plan, where a generic value card like that might not be as obvious as an include.
For Padma players that are coming from startup, you move into standard and suddenly the deck options for what you can charge using Padma's ability and her support go through the roof. And that's the kind of the effect that I appreciate moving into the bigger card pool, is that I see these tastes of an idea and say, okay, what can I do with that? And it's like, oh, you can do something with it. It's fine. And then you go into the standard card pool and you go, I can't fit all those ideas into it, and you got to pare it down.
Except in the case of Padma, you don't need anything else to charge when you have boat. So
right,
but then you don't have boat. So, but actually,
charge something.
Yeah, Padma gave me a idea, like a decent card that another one that's like good-ish in startup that probably doesn't ever really see play in standard, and that's Stone Chip Chart Room. that is a card that charges things. It works really well with the Padma plan, endurance, card draw. It does like a whole bunch of different cool things, but
not dying.
Yeah, it doesn't do enough to see play in most standard decks. So it goes from a pretty easy include in a lot of Padma decks to, you're not really going to look at it.
Does Daig first Netcat see play in either format?
No.
Unfortunately.
We need a good cat
It's
card.
unfortunate. Yeah. So like,
This is Johnny's pet card now.
yeah. Yeah, one thing I want to say, Nick, this is the thing that I worry about. I think it's easy to look at standard and think like, okay, it is a different game because the power level is immensely higher. And I think that's actually consistently untrue. I don't think that's what you're trying to say, but the idea like these cards don't see play in standard because there's better options. It's usually because there's more fine-tune options, not that there's more powerful options. Because again, once you get into standard, the majority of cards you're seeing play are startup and startup plus ashes. The Neo format is something also that's definitely worth talking about. The bigger startup format. It's not an official NSG thing, but people do play it. But like, I definitely think that if you took a startup deck and moved it, certain startup decks and moved it straight to standard and ignored the ban list change, there's a lot of startup decks that are more powerful. In standard, we're not playing against Drago. In standard, we're not playing endurance. Like, I do think the power level in a lot of factions actually goes down when you jump to standard. And that is super surprising, even with a bigger card pool. And that's mostly because there's a ban list.
Well, it's funny. Eric just last week, I was playing a bunch of this Ken deck that he built. And at the end of the night, he said, oh, yeah, and that's a startup legal deck. And I was playing it up against standard, and it was fine. You know, it worked pretty well. It's like Ken and the new Debbie Marrera.
Yeah, downtown.
Downtown Debbie Marrera. And like all these cards that just work well together. They've got a really clear, straightforward game plan, good econ. It just all worked really well. I didn't even notice going up against standard decks that it wasn't a standard deck, that it didn't have like bravado in it, you know? And there are cards in there where you'd be like, oh, I'd probably rather have bravado than like Carpe Diem. But yeah, it's not bad to have Carpe Diem in there, you know?
I think one big thing for me too is why I like talking about standard and trying to help to get people into standard is that there is so much content out there for standard. And obviously, you know, I make standard content, so I have a bit of a horse in that game. But if you want to watch streams for like the World Championship, there is a startup championship, but there's a big standard event. That is the World Championship is in standard. Continentals are all within this standard format. There is so much organized play that might feel gated out to you. And there is still really good startup organized play, but it is there's a lot more generally on a more global level that's on standard, usually from what I've seen. And being able to get into that and see what's going around the world to get involved, it's fantastic. Like y'all just went to what's it called, East Coast Nationals just a couple weeks ago. Like that's, you know, there is a startup side event, but that's mostly standard. And I think just about anyone playing startup today could join, say next week I'll be at East Coast Nationals if it was next week, and have a great time, because I don't think the jump is anywhere near as big as anyone thinks it is.
Yeah, and if you've looked at standard in the past and were sort of scared away by, for me personally, and I played in standard back in 2017, 2018, right before things ended from the FFG side. Even having done that, when I re-entered standard, I got slapped around a bunch by hard-hitting News and Boom. In particular, those two cards were a bit of a thing, right? And you come in, you don't know how to play against it. It's actually very, very easy to play into it incorrectly. And then you die, and it feels a little unfair. And then you eventually kind of get over it and realize, there's a way to play against this. But a lot of people are turned off by that. Now, that is not so much of a problem because we just had a huge rotation of, I think, 175 cards. And the same threat that is the substitution that Nick mentioned earlier, Oppo Research is a sort of a substitution for HHN, is already present in startup. And so is the punishment. Largely, I think Retribution and End of the Line are like the two, you know, very straightforward ways to use it. Now, actually, there's a lot more tag punishment that's sort of more.
Well, even some of the other stuff like shipment from Vladisibirsk is still legal in startup, right? Because that was Parhelion. So there's a ton of tag punishment that really likes having those multiple tags that it couldn't get before this most recent release, that is still legal in startup. So you're going to be playing around it, you know, the same way.
Yeah, hard-hitting news, I think, was probably the biggest barrier to a lot of people to enjoy Standard, because it is a card that, unfortunately, you had the gall to make a run on turn one in a deck without a very robust economy. You lost the game. Yeah, unfortunately, that was true. Like, that was a real thing, that you could learn to play around it. You could build around it, but like, most people didn't enjoy it. It was an important card for competitive events, but most people didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it. And that, you know, it was an older FFG card that has been changed. It's out, so you don't have to worry about that anymore. That being said, like, if you're enjoying what Neverwinter looks like now and the Null Signal games ethos, their kind of design patterns of haymakers, the whole threat idea, I think a lot of those stuff is really agreeable. The Standard format is the closest it's been to, you know, entirely that sort of stuff. So I think most of the like really, really rough cards, specifically HHN, this is why everyone's so excited right now at this rotation, because the pool, it's like they just drained the water and put in new water and everyone's enjoying it.
The community at large has been playing this game for long enough that I think they've really hit their stride when figuring out what a nice balance is between like power and exciting things that are happening and avoiding cards that are too feel bad. Like we're well past the Mumbad cycle here. So it's pretty neat that the game has kind of stabilized in this very cool place and they are still able to innovate.
I know this is a bit on the nose with Andrej being here, and I'm surprised Eric didn't say this earlier, but one of the things that actually can lower the barrier to Standard is watching Andrej streams, because he plays so many games and he talks through everything he's doing. And I've found that really helpful to understand the interactions and how to play around cards that seem really difficult or impossible to play around, and you can actually see how it's done. So I know that was a thing for me that definitely helped.
That's very kind. We specifically did a while ago. It's been a while now, new cards, new content, but we would make decks that are like, hey, here's an introduction deck to Standard. And that's something I'm definitely going to be revisiting upcoming over the next months or so, to be like, hey, if you want to go to Worlds, hey, you want to participate in this is an easy way in. Because again, as you see, the majority of the decks are actually mostly startup cards anyways. It's just understanding some of the nuances and some of the power cards you have to play around a bit. That comes in time, but I appreciate kind words. I'm super stoked to hear that it helps folks get more of the game.
In addition to the actual gameplay, there are a couple videos that I think we should put in the show notes for anybody that's looking. They're also helpful for startup players, but there were some general tip videos that you did. And one, it's actually stupidly simple, but it's such a helpful tip about planning your turn before you take your first click, like planning the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. And when you hear it, it's like, well, duh, but most people don't do it. I didn't do it. And now I think about that every time my turn starts. Oh, let me not just draw a card real quick, or let me not just play down this card, this hedge fund. Let me think about how my whole turn is going to play out. And there were, I think it was a 10-tip video, and I think you've done more than one of them, but those are really helpful. And they can help a startup player as well. But obviously, if you're intimidated by Standard and you want to just be a better player all around when you're going into a bigger card pool, that's really helpful.
We will drop a link to that in the show notes. Actually, something that came up recently in one of your streams as another example is like how to play around diversion of funds and things like that. They just come up. You know, you're part of the community. You're involved in the game. You're going to learn how things work.
And that's like a really big deal too, right? Like if we come to Standard and you realize, oh, I'm getting, you know, things are not going my way immediately. That's where communities like the Discords y'all have put together, Green Level Clearance, you come in there and say like, hey, I'm new to Standard and diversion of funds is being a problem. And people are so excited to be there. Like, oh, we've played around this for years. Here's 2 or 3 tips to keep in mind the next time you play, right? Like if you're feeling lost immediately, just there's so many places you can ask for help and everyone's excited to get you back on track.
Back to your question that you had asked about why we prefer Standard over startup. I never actually answered that. I had 3 reasons why I preferred it. Boat was one.
Understandable.
Adam was another, who's sadly no longer in Standard.
Yeah, right.
And the third reason was boat. No. The third reason was actually not the majority of cards in the card pool, but specifically IDs was a huge thing for me. I could have just gotten the additional IDs from Standard and been very happy, even if I didn't have anything else. I just felt like they opened up a lot of avenues and play styles that just weren't available with just the startup IDs.
Right. And even like just reading some of them, you look at them and go like, wait, how could this possibly be good or even do anything? I mean, the first time I read SSO Industries, which is one that's all about you want to play with face-up agendas and just leave them on the board for multiple turns. I read that, and coming from startup, I'm like, there's like one face-up agenda and it's fine, but like it's Oaktown Restoration. the 4-2 that when you advance it, it makes you money, and it makes you more if you over advance it beyond 4. Just seeing the ID can spark you to be like, okay, well, are there other ways to turn agendas face up? Are there other agendas that install face up already? And Wayland in particular, I feel like has a lot of these, like Jemison Astronautics is another one, which wants you to forfeit agendas you've already scored. And you like read through that, like, wow, how could that possibly be good? And yeah, there's cards out there to support it in standard.
I think that's such a great way to tackle the jump between startup and standard, is if you pick one ID or you pick one faction, and then you go out of your way to print proxies for like 6 or 7 cards that are relevant or that are interesting. And then you just do that every 2 weeks. You do a never faction. And at some point you're going to have the majority of card pool that's worth playing. And that's like a really nice and very easy way, as opposed to be like, here's 120 extra cards, figure it out. Right.
And it's a fun way to get to know each thing individually and like kind of figure out what makes it good. Sometimes you really do need, like with the more complicated stuff, OB or sports metal decks in particular, a lot of times you need to see it in action. But like I built a Los deck as one of my first standard decks that was just all this cool stuff about derezzing ice, and I'm going to make you res it at additional cost, and it's going to be really easy for me to get into servers. And the deck was terrible, but it taught me why Los is not very good. But like that is useful learning on its own. And I just said, hey, this is a cool ID. I'm going to build a whole deck around it. You know, I'd never really thought about it in startup. I don't even know. It's not legal in startup.
What is
it? Los?
Los, no.
No. Okay. Which explains why I hadn't thought about it. But
for clarification, there are 30 legal IDs in startup, and there are 52 legal IDs in standard. So there's 22 more.
I will say, reading through the list of the 22 IDs that are in standard that are not in startup, having played a fair amount of standard now, there are a lot of these I don't know what they do because I've never seen them. You put Saraswati Memnonics down, and I'm like, oh, all right. I had to look it up, and it does a thing.
That's the thing.
Technically. Nat, something about not having a lot of cards in hand.
Poor
I think.
Nat.
Yeah, you want low cards.
Poor
in
Nat,
hand.
little boy.
Yeah, I feel like
That's
reading this list, there are like 6 that I'm not really familiar with, but I feel like most of these see play.
Well, so my opinion here, but so there's a list. I'm going to rattle them off real quick. Outfit, SSO Industries, Jemison Astronautics, Earth Station. That's all the Waylands. Ag Infusion, Hyobu, Saraswati. That's all the Jinteki. Sports Metal, Asa, Miramorph. Asmari, Acme, GameNet. Hoshiko, Freedom, Alice Merchant, Nat, 419, Az McCaffrey, Los, Lat, and Akiko Nisei. Out of those, I think the Outfit, Ag Infusion, Sports Metal, Asa Group, Asmari, Acme Consulting sometimes, Hoshiko, Freedom, 419, and Lat see regular play. And like the other ones, yeah, you'll see them, but they're not everywhere. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's largely it. And again, this also has some overlap with some of these are from Ashes. And like, I think that's actually a really big thing to understand is when we're talking about startup to standard, if you've played Ashes for a while, this is going to help with your like onboarding, because I think Ashes card pool is inherently very powerful. So you see a lot of it over standard. But I think this is all the IDs. And I think those are the ones that see the most consistent play. And I think those are the ones that are also like kind of darlings that people enjoy playing. Like we're going to talk about competitive decks, right? Like Outfit is a very competitive deck, but Outfit is also just the coolest deck. Like there's so many ways to build it. It's really fun. It says whenever you take a bad publicity, gain 3 credits. Turns out you want to speedrun bad publicity. Didn't you not want to do that? Like it's just the funnest mechanic and it feels so Wayland. And that being a standard only card is the sort of thing where I want to show starter players. You just give them the idea and say like, imagine what you can do with this. And it's nonsense. It's really fun.
Yeah. So then if those are the IDs you've got to look out for, right? What about like the other cards, the rest of the card pool? I feel like there's a lot of cards that, particularly on the corp side, end up almost always considered for inclusion. If you're not including them, there's a reason. So in startup, that's like your spin doctors and hedge funds and stuff. In standard, you've got Rashida Jahim, which is a 0 cost asset, 1 to trash, and if it's rezzed at the start of your turn, you can trash it to gain 3 money and draw 3 cards. Just extremely efficient, gives you a whole bunch of options for that turn. Very good. And then NGO Front, which is like a classic bait and switch card. You can advance it, and then you can trash it at instant speed to make money based on how many advancement tokens you have on it. So the classic play is you put it out there, you advance it once or twice. They run through your horrible death server and go through all the ice and spend all this money, and then you just pop it for money and laugh at them. Yeah, those are, I feel like, cards that start in every corp deck, even if they don't end up there.
I don't know if NGO starts in everyone, but
yeah,
but
that's true. But it's a consideration.
Yeah, these two cards I think are actually, so Rashida specifically is the most common card across all standard decks, barring Spin Doctor and Hedge Fund. And in fact, it's actually surpassing Hedge Fund modernly. It is one of the most emblematic cards of the format. You see it in just about everything. It's neutral, it's no influence. So it's one of the cards that you definitely want to look out for. But it's very important to understand in this format that there's a card that everyone wants to put in a remote server that isn't an agenda, which is actually very interesting and changes the whole idea of, do you want to contest the server turn one? I don't think it's an agenda, but it could be a Rashida. And that actually does change the game pretty significantly. So yeah, we're going to try and keep this as approachable as possible and shout at just a couple cards that we think you have to know, right? If you didn't know any of the, say, neutral cards coming into this difference between standard and startup, I think if you only knew about Rashida or you only knew about NGO Front, you're going to be fine. I don't think there's any important, incredibly well-played neutral card that is worth taking up any space in your mind. These two, though, they're sick.
Yeah.
So in Jinteki, I went through these lists and I don't know, maybe there's something I'm missing, but there's really like the ID Ag Infusion, which is an ID that lets you, it's kind of funny. I have to get the wording.
Yeah,
do we want to read the
what it
wording?
is.
I don't know.
I can explain it without the wording.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says when you approach a piece of ice, an unresed ice, you can trash it as a corporation to force the runner to be running on a different server and they encounter the outermost ice on that server. That's all the text says. It's important to understand two things. Firstly, they have 17 influence. That's great. But secondly, when you encounter a piece of ice, that you can't res that ice as the corporation. So what the play pattern largely here is the Ag Infusion will go out their way to res their scariest ice on the outermost of honestly any server. And then once per turn, when they can fire this ability, you run some de-res dice on R&D or HQ and they trash that and they just put you on the scary nonsense they put on the outermost of anything. So you just have to understand that any run event is really hard to play because most run events say like run HQ if successful. And then suddenly instead of running HQ, you're running on archives. That's a problem. But then also you're going to be running into their, let's just say a Teeny or Vampiranasa, whatever your big ice you want to run is. You get so much value because you just keep sending the runner into it by trashing your own cards. Immensely powerful, generally a glacier identity. Sometimes you can rush out with it, but it just stretches the value of resing just one good ice.
And one example of the big scary piece of ice that they would be running into is the other card that popped out looking at the Jinteki cards that you need to be aware of, and that's Anansi. We've talked about Anansi on the podcast before. It's an 8-cost sentry, 5 strength, and whenever an encounter with it ends, if you didn't break all the subroutines on it, that card will deal 3 net damage to you. And it's got 3 pretty powerful subroutines, and that's kind of the big deal, is that you can't cheat past it, really. You can't bypass it, you can't do any of those things unless you have hushed it. Then it's going to be doing 3 extra net damage to you unless you broke it, and it's expensive to break. So that's kind of the big one, honestly, in Jinteki. I can't think of anything else that's like, I mean, there's like goofy stuff, or it might have a place in a very specific deck. Like I've seen Biovaults show up and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So there are cards, right? You'll experience cards, but I think
So
if you know these,
is Keeling not one?
Keeling is in startup.
It's a startup.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's cards that only exist in standard.
Right.
Yeah. And that being said, I think you could maybe append 1 or 2 cards here, but as long as you've played startup maybe just 6 months ago and you're aware of the old the old startup, maybe 6 months is actually too short. But if you've seen some of the null signal games like the Ashes cards, you're familiar with cards like La Costa Grid and Sting, which I think would maybe be the next cards to recommend. But that's the idea, is that if you've even seen the Ashes cycle, when we have to tell you what's the difference between startup and standard in Jinteki, and we only say 2 cards, kind of shows you the difference, how that massive change in card pool does not change the landscape as much as you think it might.
Right.
Okay, so moving on to Wayland. The number 1 card here is Border Control, far and away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good.
It's very good.
So this is a 4-cost ice. It's a barrier. It just gives credits when you hit a subroutine and it ends the run. And it's 1 strength. So that's not great for the cost. But the most important thing is at any paid ability window while the runner is running the server with the res border control, you can just trash the border control and the run ends. So kind of like MIC, that's the closest thing that's just come out. But this just ends the run. It doesn't care about any click nonsense. This thing is just immensely powerful. It's really kind of tricky to play around, really fun, and you feel great as a corporation when you use it at the right time. You can set it up. There's always a fear. Just such an amazing card, let alone play op, and you get a 3-coster at instant speed. It's sick.
And it's 3 influence, so it gets imported to a lot of other factions as a 1 or 2 of, sometimes a 3 of if the deck really cares.
And this is one of the cards that came out of the World Championship, the Magnum Opus.
This is a Magnum Opus card. Yeah, exactly.
Another one is Economic Warfare. This card can be backbreaking if it's played at the right time. It's a 0-cost operation. You can only play it if the runner made a successful run on their last turn, and it just says the runner loses 4 credits. It's not a lot of bells and whistles, but it is something that anytime you're running, you want to think, do I have enough to deal with economic warfare and then whatever punishment they're going to throw at me when I'm broke? They're going to try to land a bunch of tags on me. Do I have ways to deal with that? Like, that card can really shape a lot because you think you have money and then it says, no, you actually don't.
That's how I lost my game 1 of East Coast Nationals. Econ Warfare, hard-hitting news. And now supplement that with Oppo research.
Yeah, this one, I think we're still going to see a fair bit of it. It was really good with hard-hitting news, maybe a bit less good with Oppo, probably still fine. But very important thing if you're learning Standard, this card says lose 4 credits if able. And understanding at any paid ability window, you can boost a breaker. So if you're at 4 credits, just pay 1 to boost your Croter. You're on 3 credits. You can do that between clicks on the corpse turn. Keep your money. That's sick.
So because you can't lose 4 credits, you can't lose any credits.
Does nothing. Yeah, because it specifically says if able.
Nick's face here.
Oh.
Yeah.
I am just learning this. I didn't realize that. I thought if you had like 3, it would just wipe you out. It would do up to 4.
Exactly. If it didn't say if able, it would do as much as possible. But if any card that says if able, Toll Booth is the exact same way. If you can't, you don't lose any. It's a very weird clause. It's not on a lot of cards.
That's interesting. Okay. Good to know. We're learning. Yeah. The other big one, I would say, and this is like another like finisher card in a lot of decks, is Audacity, which is you can only play it if your hand has at least 2 cards in it, or 3 cards. 3 cards.
3 including the Audacity.
It counts itself. Yeah.
And it's a 0-cost operation at a Wayland. You discard your hand and put 2 advancement tokens on something. So it is just generally used to end of the game. You just need to fast advance that one thing to get the 3-2 to get your last couple of points. So you install, advance Audacity, score it, and end the game.
Yeah, this one's super exciting. It shows up as a minimum of 1 of in just about every Wayland deck because Wayland has access to, I think it's like 7 3-2 agendas. And if they're on 5 points and they have Audacity and just 1 credit, yeah, they win the game. So It puts that stress on, it puts that fear on. It's like one of the best cards to pull with Project Atlas if you're about to win. And even then, figuring out when you want to play this, when you have a hand and you're not winning the game, let alone there's agendas in your hand, it's the exact same sort of feeling as the sort of Slash and Burn, the new card, where it's like it's fast advance, but there's a real cost associated with it, and it's very, very flexible. Yeah, you even see it now in like a Taya. So there's a Taya fast advance decks. It's a fun one.
I was about to mention, yeah. So now there's with a Taya, you want to put a bunch of agendas into archives so that you can use Moonpool, card from Startup, to fast advance things. And Audacity does that. You just look at your handful of agendas and go, nope, you're going into the bin. And then I'm going to turn you into advancement when I shuffle you back into the deck. So I'm going to score this 5-3 from hand with a Moonpool and an Audacity. Very cool. And then the other pairing, I think, is kind of like an archetype, right? Which is the outfit. It's a Wayland ID, like Andrej said earlier. Every time you gain bad publicity, you also gain 3 money. So it pays you to take bad pub. And there are a bunch of cards that are really efficient in a lot of different ways that will give you bad pub. So Hostile Takeover is a great example of this. The 2-1, it gives you money when you score it. Now it gives you even more money. It's easy to score. It's a huge econ benefit. The only problem is you're building up this bad pub. But you want that because you're playing reg captures. It's like a cool like package unto itself with a lot of different things that you can run out of it. But it's just something to be aware of. You see the outfit across the table and you know what's coming.
One card that we wanted to mention here, Too Big to Fail, is one that if you don't know it exists, you'll be surprised by it, right? Because you think the corp is broke And as long as they have less than 10 credits, they can play this, take a bad pub, and get 10 more credits.
The card says gain 7, and then the ID gives you another 3. So it's a 0 cost gain 10. It's insane.
It's fast and dirty money. But yeah, we were trying to just speed run bad publicity to close the game out. The outfit is so fun. And that's the sort of thing, right? Like you see this ID and you think there must be cards that support it, and you bet there is. And Standard has a whole bunch of them. It's its own kind of ecosystem.
I know this is a startup card, but do you play Super Deep Warhole with the outfit?
No.
It's difficult.
The problem with the outfit is you generally want to get to 4 bad pub and then stay there. That's the lowest that you can get your reg captures in terms of their scoring ability. And then you don't want to take any more than that because it's giving the runner a bunch of benefits whenever they run. So makes it too easy to break into your servers and that kind of thing.
Also, if you want to breathe life into some startup cards that maybe don't see a lot of play, the competitive outfit decks right now are playing big deal. It's one of the only decks that can play 17 credits more than once in a game, and it's super fun to watch.
It's so good.
Yeah, that card is amazing on the deck. Okay, so let's move on to NBN. We only have 2 cards that we want to shout out here. One is Market Forces, and it's a tag punishment card that says play only if the runner's tagged, and the runner loses 3 credits for each tag he or she has, and then you gain 1 credit for each credit lost. So it's a big swing, and it hurts, and it feels bad the first time it happens to you.
It's so punishing.
Because taking money away from another player is one of those things that kind of gets under your skin sometimes. And this is the closest thing, I think, to that hard-hitting news boom feel that used to exist that still is around. But you don't die immediately, probably.
The game's still on, but it's going to be a rough game. This one sticks out as being like kind of hard to deal with because there's no good counterplay against it, unfortunately.
Just never.
So this one's
tags.
notably weird. Yeah, just don't get tags, right? How hard is that?
It's easy.
It's almost worse than dying right away because now you have to limp along and play through the rest of the game.
I don't like this one.
Now you have to watch as the corp continues playing the game and you are 2 turns behind.
Yeah, the fact that they gain credits off it is like, it's just salt in the wound, you know?
Yeah, there's ways to play around it. Like cards like Fermenter are just as popular in Standard than Startup. So offshoring your credits onto non-resources, that actually, there's nice ways you can deal with it. Some factions better than others. But this one shows up as a 1 of or 2 of in most NBN decks as their tag punishment. They generally play 1 of if you go really tag me. So it's not going to define the game, but it's an issue when it shows up.
Yep. And every once in a while, they're just going to pull it with that gaslight on the turn where you said, I'm safe to float 3. It'll be fine for this 1 turn. It is not.
And the other card that we wanted to point out is one that I feel like recently got some new life breathed into it with the resurgence of asset spam NBM decks that, with Epiphany that have come out and some of the assets that have come along with Epiphany. And that's AR Enhanced Security. A lot of people refer to this card as Ares, because ARES, which is confusing to me and other people because there's a card called Project Ares in the past that doesn't exist anymore. But anyway, that's separate. This is a 3-1 agenda. The first time the runner trashes a corp card each turn, give him or her 1 tag. So if you score this, it's bad.
If you score multiple, it's even worse. It's just you want to be trashing things against the asset spam decks. And this says, try it. Bring it. Trash things.
So I think this is like, you want to be aware of this because if you're up against an asset spam NBM deck, you probably want to be checking for AR Enhanced Securities or Ares early to prevent them from scoring this if possible.
Yeah, it sneaks through. It's rough when it does. It's worth noting that a lot of the asset-based decks, you honestly don't have to trash that much. Like, it'll be bad, but you can still win. But yeah, this one's definitely R+, Reality+. That just gives you your ability once a turn if you're putting out assets. It's a powerful one. And it's one of the strongest effects, but it is printed on a 3-1 agenda, and 3-1 agendas do kind of stink. So hopefully that balances it out.
And I think that's all we have for NBN.
Yeah, there's some ice like Endless Eula, Hydra, but that ice is kind of rare. And Endless Eula is just a really fun thing to discover on your own because it's a good joke and it's not going to hurt you. It's just there.
The first time I got it rezzed at me, it was on a Bonhar run and it was the outermost.
Yeah, that'll kill you.
It did not. Steelskin saved me. But still.
Yeah, I do love the flavor of Endless Eula.
It's such a fun card, right?
It's great.
So let's move on to HB. Gatekeeper is the first HB card that we want to call out.
Gatekeeper is a piece of ice. It is 3 to res, 0 strength, and it reads, Gatekeeper has +6 strength if you res it this turn. Has 2 subroutines, drop to 3 cards, reveal up to 3 agendas in HQ Under Archives. then shuffle those agendas into R&D, and the second subroutine is end the run.
This thing is like a real Null Signal Games-esque card, right? Like it follows their design ethos. It's one of those sort of like when you res it matters, which we're seeing all the time now, when pass, when res, threat, stuff like that. So it's like you can kind of just forget that as an FFG card in some ways, but it's really good. It's just a nice face check. Knowing that there'll be a 6 strength Kogate you have to get through at some point. If they res it early, it's like good for them, but it's not going to lose you the game. And it's just like a really nice thing as a corporation to understand when you want to res it, because for the rest of the game, it's a 0 strength Kogate and everyone gets through that for 2 credits. So you have a nice little window you have to kind of figure it out.
Yeah, I like saving it for later in the game if possible, but also the fact that it's if you resed it this turn, so they can't just bounce off of it and then come back.
Just locks down that server pretty well for that one turn, or makes it at least really pricey to get in, because that first subroutine is so crippling. I mean, just draw 3 cards, get agendas out of your hand back into R&D, put them out of archives. Like it's just such a protective thing that when it fires, it can be kind of backbreaking it really messes up the runner's odds. The next one up is Sportsmental. So this is another ID, and it is an HB ID, 45 cards, 15 influence. Every time an agenda is scored or stolen, you choose one. You either draw 2 cards or you gain 2 credits. So this actually plays a lot like the Jinteki PE decks, where it just wants to play a bunch of small agendas that are going to constantly get scored or stolen, because it uses those as fuel for card draw, money, econ, that kind of thing. Adding into that, there is specifically one agenda that really can power this up called Hyperloop Extension. It's a 3/1 HB agenda that when it's scored or stolen, you gain 3 money. And then, of course, your ID triggers as well. So you could either gain 5 money off of giving the runner 1 point. It can completely pay for itself because it's paying you back for advancing it, and then either giving you cards or money. It just gives you so many options for how you're going to approach a turn when you start to score these things with any like real regularity.
Sports is super fun, right? It's the sort of idea you can give to someone, and the way they play it is you can basically do whatever you want within that shell, because it's just going to push you forward even when you're losing. And that's kind of nice. They're stealing agendas. Cool. I'll draw cards. And it's also really fun to have an ability that you can make decisions off of your turn as much as the runner is. They steal an agenda on R&D. Do you want to draw 2 or gain 2? That's a really important decision. Sports is just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it moves fast, and you're not punished too hard for bad decisions if you're learning. So
yeah, it's definitely easy to pilot. I mean, I played well with it, so it's got to be easy to pilot.
I think it is a lot of people's like comfort fallback ID. If you don't know what's going on in the standard meta, you just play sports metal, and it's you're not going to go to time into the tournament if you're ever worried about that. Let's just say that.
It used to be like Panic Pālanā, but now it's like Panic Sports.
Yeah.
Andrej, do you want to read the next card?
Yeah, MCA austerity policy. This one's coming back. So this is a really interesting card because it's a win condition of a card. It's an asset. It costs 1 to res. I believe it's only 3 to trash. And you can spend a click to put a power counter on it once a turn. And then once it has 3 power counters on it, you can spend a click to take all the power counters off it, trash the austerity, and then you get, I think, 4 extra clicks for that turn, which means you can have turns where if this thing keeps getting powered up, you can score a 5/3 agenda from hand. Now, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and you're broadcasting that probably run HQ. I'm probably holding an agenda to fast events next turn. But firstly, every time that you put a power counter on it, the runner actually loses a click on their following turn. That used to be incredibly relevant. We used to have more biroids in standard that face checking and not being able to click through it were much more punishing. But right now, this card is feeling even more fair. It's an interesting win condition that is on the table, and kind of there's like, there's a bit of a storm. It's like a cloud passes over the whole table. And you have to figure out how to get through that. But it's very flexible, as I think it's only 3 influence. So it actually has shown up in almost every faction in a competitive way, because you can do a nonsense with a 5 to 6 click turn.
It feels very similar to Keeling in a lot of ways, where it's on the table. You have to figure out how to deal with it before it gets to a certain number, or things are going to get rough.
They scored a 5/3. You don't lose the game, but it is the sort of thing where I have a huge side objective I probably should be dealing with.
Right.
Yeah. If MCA austerity is a cloud passing over the table, then Keeling is the plane crashing in your house.
The thunderstorm. Yeah.
I think that's most of HB. There are, again, some standout cards if you've played, and I think I haven't included these in when I was doing my own research, but if you played Ashes, you're probably familiar with things like Fully Operational, very powerful card. You're probably familiar with Tranquility Home Grid, a really easy to play defensive, well, not defensive, but it's an upgrade that pushes you forward. And those cards are very important standard as well. But again, if you've played Ashes, if you play Startup right now as well, there's like 3 or 4 cards maybe you have to know about HB, and then you're kind of good to go.
Chinny, with the next one?
Hippo says when you break all the subroutines on the outermost piece of ice on the server that you're attacking/running, you may trash that. You trash Hippo to trash that piece of ice.
You remove it from the game.
It's not even just trash. Yeah, you can't recur Hippo. It's RFG'd.
Right. Yeah, this card is very impactful when it's sitting on the table across from you or it gets dropped and you have a strong, expensive piece of ice sitting on the outside of your server. You start to feel pretty bad. Because again, some of these, we're trying to highlight the cards that are impactful and others that might catch you off guard. This is kind of both. Yeah.
So I was going to ask about if Ag Infusion moves you. It says you're now running that server, so it would still work. Are there cards that move you off of a server that then prevent Hippo from working, or is that not a thing that can happen?
So Hippo is actually one of the most powerful cards against Ag Infusion, because what Hippo cares is if you break all the subroutines on the outermost ice. So if Ag Infusion just wants to have one outermost ice and they're throwing you into that, if you do break all the subroutines, they're going to have no more outermost ice that's res because you've eaten their Ag Infusion ice. Right. Hippo is like really, really good.
Getting your Anansi eaten by a Hippo is the worst.
So Hippo is 5 influence. It's actually one of the highest influence hardware ever printed, besides, I think, Endurance. And it is massively powerful because it's a card you can just put on the table and it's just ice destruction you have in your back pocket. The history of how prevalent and how easy it is to splash ice destruction, generally an Anarch thing in your deck. This is actually in the history of Netrunner, probably where you're going to see the least ice destruction. There's just not a lot of cards that do it consistently. So Hippo is the one that shows up in Anarch decks. This is the kind of card that once you get to standard, this card seems very powerful, but then you very quickly learn the very simple patterns that you can play around this. Specifically, Hippo says the outermost piece of ice. So if you have one really good piece of ice and you've rezzed it, just put any piece of ice in front of it and you don't even have to res that ice, because it's no longer the outermost piece of ice. So you see a lot of like very smart core players say like, okay, I spent 6 to 7 credits on this really good ice on my Vampire Nasa. I'll just put something in front of it, never res it, and then I know my Vampire Nasa will never be Hippoed. Hippo is also unique, which means there can only be one on the table. Not that having 2 it wouldn't functionally change anything that turn, but it's a very powerful card with a lot of ways to deal with it.
Yeah.
Andrej, do you want to tell us about Freedom and Yusuf?
Yeah. So Freedom is the virus-based Anarch identity. Freedom says that whenever you're accessing a card that doesn't have a trash cost, you can remove virus counters on any number on cards that you have to trash that card, as long as you remove virus counters equal to the cost of the card. So the idea is you run HQ, you see a Biotic Labor, you could be like, okay, 4 virus counters are going to go, and you can trash it. So you get this identity that's all about this like trash forward. It's actually very similar to Lou in Startup, except you're playing with all the cool viruses and you have this weird virus engine. And then there's a bunch of notable cards that almost only see play in Freedom because they're like very, very virus heavy focused stuff. So Yusuf is a fractor that breaks barriers by spending virus counters and gets virus counters whenever you make a successful run. So you get this virus battery and also you don't sweat barriers anymore. Freedom has won worlds before. It's a very flexible identity and very good in identities or in metas, where you can get a lot of cheap runs and there's a lot of cool things to destroy, like fast advance pieces or trashing assets by not paying the trash cost, by paying the res cost. You save a lot of money very quickly.
Is Amakua an auto include in Freedom decks?
Usually, but not always, because there's like this battle between Amakua where you don't want to trash cards, but then you want to trash cards with Freedom. So they start internally fighting.
And there's like a new breaker that Yusuf is toying around with called Audrey V2, which is pretty neat. That's kind of a callback to an older card. Mick, talk about Ma.
Yeah, Ma. So this card got me. I actually ran into this for the first time at Nats, but it's a 6 cost console out of Anarch, +2 MU, and the first time each turn you access a card not in archives and do not steal or trash it, the corp must trash 1 card from HQ at random. This is so disruptive. It's like, it kind of sounds not that bad, at least the first time I read it, but no, it's incredibly annoying to deal with because you're sitting there with your 4 or 5 card hand and then they just take one of your options away and it just goes into archives. It's doing the sabotage thing. if you're playing a bunch of other sabotage, it's thinning out your hand so that you don't have as many options of things that are harmless to trash. So you are more likely to have to go off of your R&D. It's just this very disruptive card that if it hits the table and you're not ready for it, it can really just mess up your whole turn. If you don't have a hand, if you've got a 5-card combo and you're just sitting with that in your hand and like, all right, next turn I win, and they drop a maw, it's a bad time. That's why you want to have flexibility instead of just, massive combos and stuff like that.
Maw is wild. It is very impactful. It's very fun to play. I don't want to get too deep in the rules unless we really want to, but it is the only Netrunner card in which you're required to bring dice, and it does not mention roll a die on it.
Oh, yeah, because it's
gotta be
random.
truly random.
Yeah, so you need a way to randomize it. Shuffling the hand alone is not randomizing, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, interesting.
I guess I am going into it now because I feel like I have to. So check this out. You run HQ, you access a card. So you flip a card over. It is the rightmost card. It's a seamless launch. Technically, Maw has to fire while you're accessing that seamless launch, but it has to be one of the candidates that you can randomly trash. So you actually have to come up with a mapping, and you have to tell the corp, I'll roll a die. 1 is seamless launch, and then 2, 3, 4 will be the other cards, and you have to roll a dice there because you will know if you trash the seamless launch you're accessing, and if you do, it'll enter archives face up, or you'll trash one of the other ones and then return the seamless launch to HQ.
Yeah, so you can't even put the seamless launch back in your hand and shuffle it because you lose the information of whether or not it was the one you were accessing or if there was another one in the hand. Right.
Wow.
It's weird. It's a very powerful card, though. 6 is expensive, but fair.
It is worth the money.
Yeah.
Okay, next card.
Stargate is a program. Click Run R&D. If successful, instead of accessing cards, reveal the top 3 cards of R&D. Trash one of the revealed cards. Use this ability only once per turn. And this is an almost reprint of an older card called Keyhole, which did nearly the same thing, except it wasn't once per turn, and the corp had to shuffle R&D afterwards, right?
Yeah, Keel was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was so good, but a bit absurd. This is one of the cards that, like, if you played Ashes, you definitely know this card because it was the prominent multi-access that Anarchs played. It is kind of fallen off a bit. You still see it as a 1-of, sometimes a 2-of if there's too much fast advance and Anarchs want to control the top of R&D. But it is a very powerful option to, like, control the game and trash the right things and make sure the corps are not drawing agendas. It's good.
Yeah, it's good R&D lock. And obviously, you're just filling up archives with all the combo pieces they want or their agendas that you can then run and grab.
It's like a Swiss Army knife for the runner. It's like whatever you don't want them to have.
It is also, it will not work with Maw because you're trashing a card. But
you're also not accessing it.
That was the thing that I was thinking of was with Hoshiko.
That too.
Yeah.
If you are using Stargate to look at the top of R&D, you can more easily control when and how Hoshiko is flipping, if that's something advantageous. I personally think for the most part, you just keep it on the side that draws you cards, but there are times when you want to stop that. So this can help while still giving you access.
It also gives you the ability, if it's not your last click, to get an agenda if it's in any of the top 3 cards.
Right.
As long as you can get into archives, of course.
Or you leave it on top of R&D if it's there.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all of the Anarch cards that we wanted to highlight is the difference. The next set is Crim. And the first one we're going to lead off with is Amakua. Amakua is a very important card to talk about. It's an AI breaker, and it's one that uses virus counters to get stronger. And it's kind of a rules nightmare. It's when you first encounter Amakua, there's a good video. I forget who made it. That's like an Amakua 101, like, what does Amakua do in this situation and in this situation? And largely, it's not in practice that hard. But whenever you expose a card or access a card that you don't trash, sorry, the wording's changed.
You should look at the updated wording is much clearer. So it's got 2 clauses to it. When you expose a card, place a virus counter on it. And then whenever you finish breaching a server, if you didn't steal or trash any accessed cards, place a virus counter. So it charges up from seeing things without trashing them is kind of the shorthand way to think of it. But
wait, so do you get twice as many now if you don't trash? Now you always get one?
No, because accessing is not exposing.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, expose is on like a very small subset of cards where you like point at a card and be like, corp, show me what that is. It's nothing to do with the successful run stuff.
Okay.
It's a super niche, actually. There's very few exposed cards in standard, let alone startup.
Yep.
One of the cards that consistently will give you exposed, fairly consistently, is the ID that you will see this a lot in, and although definitely not the only one you'll see it in, and that's 419. 419 is an ID that says once per turn on the first card that gets installed, the corporation needs to either pay a credit or expose that card. So Amaku is a natural fit in there because if they don't pay a credit every time as a tax, then your Amaku gets charged. And you get to know what's there, which is pretty great.
These two cards like abstractly represent, I think, pain points maybe in standard. I think 419 is just an annoying deck to play against because either they figure out everything you put down or you end up paying like 6 to 12 extra credits throughout the game. If you're building decks that don't have a lot of economy because it's your homebrew and you don't put enough economy in there, 419 is gonna get you. And like that's the sort of thing that you have to learn as sooner. Like if you put more money in there, worth noting 419 is not very popular in standard. But Amakua is, again, as an icebreaker that can break all subtypes, but is dependent on snowballing, getting a lot of runs, getting the counters on there, as long as you ice up everything. So it's not easy to get in anywhere. And if you spend a turn to purge virus counters, Amakua feels to be pretty fair right now. It's powerful, but there's ways to deal with it for sure.
419 is not very popular in standard right now.
Nope.
Really?
Yep.
I mean, not successful, but
correct.
Like of Crim IDs, it's kind of
the default.
As far as I understand, it's like,
right?
the one that you're going to see.
Yeah.
It's the generic one. It's like kind of like the Hoshiko. Like if you just want to play, I want generically low, I want to play purple and not do anything too special, you end up playing with 419. But at least when it comes to competitive right now, 419's had a really, really bad translation rate in the last 2 tournaments.
I guess that's where we're differing in what we're interpreting. Because I think it was like 29 players were playing 419 at APAC, right?
Yeah.
So it was popular. It just wasn't good at winning.
And then next week, 2.
Yeah, sure. Probably because they saw the results of that.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Does Mavirus
I guess that's what I meant.
totally turn off Amakua decks?
It's why Mavirus is splashed into so many decks. It's
like if you want to start building corp decks in standard right now, you play 3 Spin Doctors like startup, 3 Rashidas, that's very specifically standard, and generally 1 or 2 Maviruses as a starting point. And that helps so much with just everything generally that it's worth doing.
One of the other things you said, Andrej, that 419 it's annoying to play against. And I would contest that it's annoying to learn to play against.
Yeah.
And then once you get it, it's fine. But it's one of those things, just like these like gotcha things, that the first time when you experience it for the first time, you go, God damn it, another credit? Like, I keep forgetting about this. That's annoying. But then once you get the idea of how to deal with it, it's okay, and you learn how to plan around it.
Yeah, on that note, if we want to like help people get to the right play pattern, 419 hits you the first time you install a card. So as much as possible, you want to batch install. So it'd be like, I'm not going to install this turn, but next turn I'll install 2 cards just to make sure you're not paying a credit a turn, because that's pretty expensive.
Yep.
The next card is Diversion of Funds. Andrej, can you tell us about Diversion of Funds?
Yeah, this is actually a very important card. It's a reprint of one of the most seminal criminal cards for a long time. It's a run event. It takes 2 clicks though instead of 1. It costs a credit, and it says Run HQ. If successful, instead of accessing any cards, you can make the corp lose up to 5 credits. For each credit they lose, you gain that same amount. So this is one of the most powerful cards abstractly. It's an interesting card, at least, because it is an HQ run that is super important, but it doesn't care about accessing cards. It's all about denying credits and bringing that money to your side. Criminals are really good at putting pressure on, forcing the corporation to res more ice. Again, we talked about how 419 slows you down. So suddenly just losing all your money and then they run the remote server, you can see how that comes very problematic very quickly. Now, this is another card that I think a lot of players are going to have to learn how to play around and into when they get to standard. I think there's a lot of tips from a lot of seasoned players how to deal with this thing. Ideally, one of the best things you can do is when you start the game as a corporation and you're playing around a criminal, you have to understand their deck will have 3 diversion of funds of it. So you want to make sure that does not land on turn 1 because you're going to be in a bad spot. So you want to prioritize icing up HQ before you do anything else. Even if you can't res that ice, they don't know that. Pretend you can res the ice on HQ. Get some ice on HQ before you do anything else. From that point forward, getting a second ice on HQ into early to mid game is kind of important. Also, remember, if they run HQ and they're not diversioning of funds, if there's no agendas in HQ, maybe 1 agenda in 5, don't res the ice. Because as soon as you res the ice, they know what program they need to put down to return to diversion of funds you. That's, sometimes you want to keep that information secret so they never feel like they can confidently do it. There's also some play patterns where if you like res assets, you can duck the diversion. So if you're on 5 credits, they diversion you, and then you res like, I don't know, a Maryland campaign and then another asset, a virus, and you have 0 credits. They can still access, but the idea is you deny the economic loss and you have stuff on the table to at least show for your money, which is another really nice thing to do.
And if you're one of the decks that has the luxury of playing things like border control, you just put it on HQ, and when they diversion you, you go, okay, your run is over.
Yeah, Critium Grid is another nice one too if you're really worried about diversion. Put that on HQ, the run's not successful, and so it only fires if the run's considered successful. You're safe.
The only other card that we want to mention that's not in Ashes here is Miss Bones. That is a runner card that basically just gives you, is it 12 credits?
12 credits.
12 credits.
12 credits to use for trash and stuff.
They have to be installed.
Okay. Trashed install cards.
Interesting. Yeah. Can't use it on...
The one card I thought I could get away with like not pulling up and reading. Thank you. That's why we have you here, Andrej. This card is great against asset spam. I think it's been seeing, consistently like one of or two of in most Crim decks because it's in faction. I don't know how much influence it is. It's like two or three.
Just two.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to splash into stuff. Good econ.
Right. So it's great for dealing with asset spam decks because if they're looking to just get you down economically, this is like, go ahead. It costs 1?
2.
2. So you gain 10 credits for a single click to trash stuff. That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And specifically with how it works against like those tag storm decks there, where if they play market forces, well, that's all right. My credits are over here on Miss Bones. I'm going to use those to trash your stuff. You can't get at them with market forces or econ warfare or anything like that. So very cool.
Let's see a near print of Miss Bones that can remove tags with those credits too. The other two cards that were in Ashes that if you missed them that are important, we want to call it here is just Bravado and Class Act. Those are two staples that you'll see a lot of. We're just going to skip right ahead since it's getting a little long in the tooth here to Shaper. And two of the three cards here are in Ashes. The first one is Ngolo. Ngolo is a breaker. It's a decoder. And it's an expensive decoder, but it's one that will allow you to basically paint whatever you're encountering for 2 credits into a code gate once per turn. And it's a very efficient breaker. It's base strength 2, and it's 2 credits to boost 4, which is massive. It doesn't deal super well with things that are like 3 strength, but it's a great multi-tool program. And it's also got amazing art that I covet the playmats of that I wish I could have.
Yeah.
This is the closest I think Shaper's ever had to something like Endurance. And you can see just how different it is. It is expensive, but there are a lot of Shaper decks that will play this as this is the breaker I'm going to get down until I have to find my other breakers, because it can technically deal with 1.5 ice consistently every turn, as long as you have enough money. On its own, that's good enough. You'll see it sometimes out of faction in like freedom lists. It's definitely powerful.
Kit loves this, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other two kind of, I think, in my mind, are paired. Self-modifying code and simulchip are 2 cards that enable such classic Shaper bullshit, right? It's like the stuff that you can do out of Shaper is enabled so much by these cards, and to play Shaper without them feels like, what are we doing? Like, what are we even doing? This is one of the things when you move from startup to standard and you get to play, and this used to be the case, right? When Ashes was in there, when you get to play with these cards and do these cool kick flips. And Simulchip enables Clot in such a way that makes it much more viable than previously, because if the corp purges and it goes in the bin, then if you have a Simulchip on the board or 2, then they got to do it again and they got to do it again, and it's good stuff. So wanted to mention those.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah, just tutoring and installing stuff in the middle of a run just to mess with people, because why not?
And with that, we just have 3 cards left. Johnny, do you want to tell us about Mad Dash?
Mad Dash is a run event. If you use it and you score an agenda during the run, then you gain an additional agenda point. Otherwise, you suffer meat damage. If you hit an agenda during that run, you also add Mad Dash to your area as a 1 point. So you gain an additional point for the agenda you stole. Otherwise, suffer meat damage. So it's great in cards where you can take a peek and know that you're going to score an agenda before you make the run.
Like those decks that are running Stargate that are trashing those agendas over into the archives, then you can go Mad Dash it out. Although I haven't seen it a ton lately.
No, it's died off a bit. And that's, I think agenda suites are a bit more interesting. It used to be mathematically very good. If you ever find agenda suites that are running only 3-pointers, that's amazing, because now you can steal a 3, and a fake 1. Mm-hmm. Or if they're only running 2-pointers, you don't have to steal 4 agendas, you steal a 2, and a fake 1. It's still really good, but it's slowed down.
I guess the loss of Obokata protocol probably brought on the Mad Dash went away. It's some of the value.
I really liked it.
It's like Global Food Initiative.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Adam is so good with this thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's still Bologna, something that you could take a look at and decide not to steal and then Mad Dash back at it. But the big thing about it is that if you're not aware that it's around, it can mess up the runner's breakpoints on when they win the game, like Andrej was saying. And so that's kind of like the feels bad moment where like they figure out where your agenda is and they go and mad dash it, and they go from, oh yeah, if you steal that, you don't win the game. I can still keep playing, to nope, game's over out of nowhere.
It's also a really cool card in the format. This is the kind of stuff, mad dashing for a win can feel so momentous, right?
Yeah. Or flatlining yourself to mad dash. You see that every once in a while. Also momentous.
Yeah. How about the next card?
DJ Fenris, unique connection, cost 3, cost 1 influence, which is weird as a neutral card. But you play 1 of per deck, and when you install it, you can look through your entire card pool for the format and find an identity that's in a different faction while you're currently playing that has that subtype Gmod on it. A lot of the subtypes on identities largely don't matter. They're just kind of flavored to tell you who the character is, and this one cares. So you can take any of the genetically modified runners and you gain their text box as well. So for instance, if you want to become Lou on top of whatever shaper you're playing, you can do it. The most common one is if you're playing anything besides criminal, you can get Steve Cambridge's ability, which means you run HQ, you basically take a card back from your heap, with the corporation having some choices in it. So it turns out for 1 influence and 3 credits, becoming Steve Cambridge consistently becomes one of the actually best central pressure cards, HQ pressure cards specifically, as much as you could argue for some fringe cases to become something else.
And that is in addition to your actual ID ability. It doesn't replace your ID, it's in addition to. So very cool.
You get a double dip, and there's more Gmods in standard than startup, bigger card pool, so you got a lot of fun combinations you can play with.
Funny, I'd only played this in Adam, and I totally missed the fact about it not matching your faction because it didn't matter there. I did not realize that was a restriction.
Yeah, it's great there. Did we lose any Gmods to the rotation?
Smoke, at least.
Okay. Yeah, but you don't usually, it's not Steve, right? So yeah. So I guess really that's like the last card. We wanted to mention DreamNet just because, again, one of the Ashes cards that's pretty impactful, allows you to draw a card. And if you're Hoshiko, probably, if you're a virtual subtype ID, then you can also gain a credit, but mostly out of Hoshiko, it's just drawing a card. That's another neutral runner card that you might see. I guess outside of the cards, there are a few mechanical differences, right? Traces are much more prevalent in standard than they are in startup. That's kind of a rules overhead thing, I think, as a sort of a choice. And I don't know. I think in general, NSG is moving away from traces.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of startup players that don't know what a trace is. There are some on null signal games cards, but they don't exist. And honestly, in standard, there's like only 3 or 4 cards that care about traces that see any mana play. So it's actually still frighteningly rare in standard.
I was going to say, even in standard, like a lot of the cards that did care about tracing, Sunny as a whole rotated.
God.
HHN was probably the most prevalent trace in the game, and that just rotated. So yeah.
It's like Turnpike's gone too. There's not a lot of ice that traces anymore. Yeah. IP block is gone. Yeah.
I guess it's mostly an artifact of FFG cards still being in the pool, but you have to be more aware of traces. Want to just do final thoughts here, guys?
Yeah, I think in a whole, right, like we spent a lot of time talking about the differences between standard and startup. Again, I want to reiterate that if you want to get into this slowly, print a couple proxies, I want to try some HP cards, that's a nice way in. But I just want to tell you, I want to promise you, if you want help getting into standard, there's so many places you can ask for help that would be excited to help you. And the card pool is functionally a lot smaller than you will. I just want to say this really quickly because I looked through a bunch of the Continental decks that were just at Cascadia this last weekend. And these are decks that are being played on stream. And if you're saying, I don't want to watch standard because I don't understand the cards, if you play startup right now and you played Ashes in startup, Charlie's Hoshiko deck that was in the top 8, there's only 2 cards out of the 24 cards that you might not know. If you look at Yusengren's Arasana, there's only 2 cards out of the 23 you don't know. So if you think standard is way different than startup, I want to promise you that it isn't. There's so many decks where the amount of new cards is like 3 or 4, and it's very easy to proxy those, and you're playing, top of standard immediately with very minimal changes. It's fantastic.
Okay, so right before our outro here, I just want to say thank you again to Andrej for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
For all that you do, honestly, you have been a source of consistent positive energy for the game for so long that the game would look very, very different, I think, without you in the scene. So thanks again for everything you do.
That's very kind. Thank you.
And that's a wrap for episode 11 of Neon Static. We've been your hosts, Eric,
Nick,
Johnny,
and Andrej.
And if you want to get in touch with us about anything we've said during this podcast, we can be reached by email at neonstaticpod@gmail.com. We're also Neon Static Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Our handles on Discord are Canister, Triforce Legend, and Gullbrander. If you want to reach Andrej, then what's the best way?
I'm on YouTube, the Metropole Grid. Leave me a comment.
A link to the New Hampshire Netrunners Discord will be in the show notes. And if you've enjoyed the show, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for listening.
I'm not going to be required to produce my own squishing noises, right?
That's going to be all me.
Nice.
What?
I'm just looking up synonyms for edible.
God.
Digestible. Esculent.
You'd use code digestible.
Comestible.
Comestible.
I don't even
Toothsome.
Ooh.
Never.
Toothsome.
Yeah, that's a horrendous word.
Andrej, did you turn on an AC over there, maybe?
I did. Is it fucking your shit up?
Yeah, I can hear it.
Guess I'll die.
Guess I'll die.
I guess I'll die.
Welcome to the podcast.
It's going to be a 10-minute one, right?
Record fast. Yeah.
I just want to say as feedback to show the title of the Jank Bank for the section makes me so uncomfortable every time I hear it.
Yes.
That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of the point.
Oh, I don't like it.
You don't like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
No, you don't have to change it. I think it's good that there's a strong reaction to the content you're putting out there.
Nails on a chalkboard.
Nick, can you repeat one line for me to insert back in?
Yeah.
Your first line, you said, I wish I was excited as you were.
Oh, I didn't say as. Yeah.
Can you just do that whole line?
I wish I was excited as you were, but honestly,
Nope, you did it again.
I wish I was as excited as you were.
There you go.
That's what I just said.
Did I
say
not
that? Say the as?
No.
You said, I wish I was excited.
I wish I was excited Jesus Christ.